All right, and our last book of the New Testament is the Revelation of John. Let's turn to that now as we share the final PowerPoint for this course. And here we go. So the book of Revelation definitely represents a different genre, written at the very end of the first century, somewhere around the year 96, while the Emperor Domitian was reigning over the Roman Empire. Written by a person named John. Some would say the Apostle John, others would say it's a John known in the area of Asia Minor, but definitely a product of the Johannine community somehow. The text itself says that it was written or at least received on the island of Patmos, and it was written to 7 churches in Asia Minor, which is current day Turkey. The theme is somewhat cryptic because it's a different genre. The theme is overcoming by the blood of the Lamb, which is taken straight from chapter 12. But at the end of the day, it's meant to be an encouragement for the Christian community in Asia Minor. It's meant to encourage them to hang in there and to persevere. So the apocalyptic genre, we've seen the gospel genre, the narrative genre, the letter genre, and then now finally the apocalyptic genre. And when we say that it's written to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, we mean right there at the coast of current day Turkey. So here you see the remains of an island in the Mediterranean, and coming up here, we come up from Syria and they go around the corner here is Turkey. And notice that they're kind of located in a circular sort of fashion. So the city of Ephesus, and then Smyrna, current day Izmir, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Verse 3 of chapter 1 sets the tone for this book. It says, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near." And so it's supposed to be a good experience to read this book, to hear this book. It talks about a reader because people would read these scrolls in front of the congregation, and then people would hear it. And so it's supposed to be a good experience, not at all a scary experience. Over the centuries, people have had some trouble knowing what to do with the book. For one, people were not familiar anymore with the genre, with the literary genre of apocalypse. But we know now that there are and there were many different apocalyptic books. So people kind of interpreted, try to understand it in 4 main ways. And that's just kind of like 4 boxes, because at the end of the day, there are 100 ways of reading it, right? But let's divide it up in 4 main ways. First would be a preterist approach, which is pretty much an approach that focuses on the history and the cultural context, right? So a preterist would read the book in the context of the 1st century and sometimes all the way up to the end of the Roman Empire. So you read it, and everything that you read would be representative of the time in which it was written. An idealism would read the book in a symbolic sort of fashion. It's kind of like one big battle between good and evil. A dispensationalist would read the letter kind of futuristically. These are the people that think it's an end time sort of book, and you need to have all sorts of time schemes, and there are raptures, and of course that would mean that when the original people first would receive the book in the early churches, they would not be able to have made sense out of it, because it would not make sense until you get kind of like to our time or beyond, because it has future bearing. Okay, so that's kind of weird. Eclecticism means that you are very eclectic in your interpretation. You take a little bit from each one of these categories and put it together and make sense of it. Okay, so overall, when you look at this genre, it's very interesting because it kind of works with your brain, right? It on one hand, it talks about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, referring to Jesus. It says, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, it has conquered. And then you look the other way and it says, a lamb, there's a lamb standing there as if it has been slaughtered. So it's full of oxymorons. You expect a conquering lion, and then you see a real vulnerable lamb. And the way it's winning a war, it's by being slaughtered. So this book is really just full of surprises. So how then do you read it best? Well, I want you to look at this cartoon here. It's a political cartoon. And I would want to ask you who this is. Do you see this person in the cartoon? Who's this elderly person? And I bet that a lot of you say, well, that's Uncle Sam. But I grew up in the Netherlands and was educated in the Netherlands. I lived there until I was 21. So I went to school, elementary school, middle school, high school. And I had history books there. And I remember we had pictures like this. And I always thought, why did they dress up, these old people in America, in such a funny way? And is this what people wear on voting day in America? And why do these people have a funny hat on? And so I guess those are the colors of the country. And why do they call him Uncle Sam? I never understood what Uncle Sam had to do with America. And I actually looked it up, and you can Google it, that Uncle Sam is was actually a real living person that they used for something there. But I never understood this star on the hat. I never understood these stripes. That comes way, way later. And so you don't understand the effect of this being used to promote voting, and the average Joe, kind of Uncle Sam, being called up to go and join the vote. You don't understand why this is an older person, why this represents the stars and the stripes, and why this is in your face, until you kind of look into the background of this, until you understand what the flag represents and who all these people are. You really just don't understand this cartoon until you understand who Uncle Sam is and what America stands for. It's 2 layers. Next, now this is very interesting, right? Look at this. Just another day at the office for Julian Assange. And then a little hint as well in this political cartoon, support wikileaks.org. Now I want you to look here. So we see some sort of roads, and we see tanks. Notice the flags on the tank. And then there's a person sitting there behind the computer. Now, if I ask you to interpret what this political cartoon is saying, could you do it? What kind of information do you need? So another day at the office. So is this truly an office? It's not, right? This is some sort of satire or sarcasm. This is not an office, because he's not sitting in an office building. And what is WikiLeaks? And who is Julian Assange? Okay. So typically my students get this part. They can tell this is not an office. This is a person working on a computer. WikiLeaks is a place where people upload confidential documents leaked from government sources. And Julian Assange is actually a person who did that. This was politically a hot thing. Now, a little caveat here. I want to make sure that you understand that I am not in favor or against necessarily this political cartoon. I have an opinion, but that's not what this is about. I am not showing you this political cartoon to speak in favor or against this particular cartoon, because this is very sensitive, right? Because people are very divided over how to take this. Once upon a time, this person, Julian Assange, loaded up sensitive materials to a publicly accessible website. So the people who are very upset with this and who think that this person committed a horrible crime are upset because by uploading these documents, he could have made uh, um, sensitive data accessible to people. This could have shown the identity of people who needed protection, and therefore people could have been assassinated. Operations that the government was doing could have been compromised. People on the other side of the argument say, yes, that should be done. The public has the right to have access to these documents. Nothing should have been kept from us. We need to know if we're being under surveillance. And so he's a hero. So one group thinks that this man is a hero, and the other group thinks this man is the greatest villain who ever lived. He actually escaped the country, lived for a while in different embassies, and then got asylum in another country. But there's something else going on here. But that's not the only thing, right? There are these tanks, and the tanks carry American flags. Do you know what the road stands for? Notice that these white lines go across. This is actually a square. This is actually a city square. This represents Tiananmen Square in China. In 1989, there was a long time uprising. In 89 is when the wall came down in Berlin. I lived in Europe at the time. It was a big thing. And former communist barriers came down. And so students in favor of democracy were also protesting over in China. And they occupied this square, Tiananmen Square, for many, many weeks. And people thought that too was going to crumble and that more freedom would come about in China, communist China. But the communist government would not stand for it. And so in June, they sent in the tanks and they cleared out that square. And most of the footage has been wiped off the internet. In my regular classroom, I actually show a very brief excerpt. And if you want to Google it, put in Tiananmen Square, I think it's June 4th, 1989, the Tiananmen Square event. And you can see footage of them clearing it out. So trigger alert, it's quite some hefty footage. And you see some people running off and they're bloodied and it's bad. But the government rolled in with tanks. Now, of course, those tanks are Chinese. They're not American. And then I want you to look, if you want to do this, right? I don't want you. If you want to look up Tank Man. One of the protesters just had sat there for weeks. He was not gonna step down. He was holding, and I remember seeing this live in 89. He stood in front of these tanks and he was holding plastic bags. I remember that. And the whole world was watching and holding its breath. And he stepped in front of the tanks. And as you moved to the left, the tanks moved. And as you moved to the right, the tanks moved. And the tanks stopped. They stood still as he, like the biggest hero ever, stood in front of these tanks, and he could have just been shot down. Later, the word is he was executed. But that's what he did. Now, putting that all together, the Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks, and the Tiananmen Square event way in the late 80s, you can see what this political cartoonist is trying to do, right? Remember that the man with these bags stood for democracy, and the Chinese tanks came at him, and he like a hero stood in front of these tanks. Well, this political cartoonist says it's like this guy who's uploading these documents, sensitive government data that he was not allowed to disclose. He says it's like standing in front of the Chinese tanks, except in this case, the American tanks are trying to silence him. And so they come at him and he heroically sits behind this computer desk and uploads it. Now, whether you think this is a terrible cartoon, the worst cartoon ever, or this cartoon nails it and you're on the other side, I want you to notice that you would not understand the essence of this cartoon unless you know who Julian Assange is, unless you know what WikiLeaks is, and unless you know what happened in history in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, and therefore that you are able to understand the symbolism in this cartoon. Apocalyptic literature and the book of Revelation is much like this. You cannot understand it by just reading it as if it's happening today or tomorrow. You have to understand the history. You have to understand what was going on in the Roman Empire. You have to understand the Hebrew Bible, because there's lots of symbolism that comes out of the Old Testament. You have to understand the literature and the narrative behind it. You have to understand so many components in order to know what's going on. It's many different layers. And when people explain it to you with just one layer, they're missing it. You're really just missing it. So symbolism, I think media and art exerts great influence. So in Revelation 6, it talks about 4 riders on a horse. One represents death, one represents hunger. There's a white rider that comes in. And so here you see some sort of art that it looks kind of timely, and here they come. But look at the passage here. It talks about a lamb opening a seal, and the 4 living creatures come out, and then there's horses, and they come out conquering and to conquer. But it's just permission has been given. It doesn't really say that they are doing stuff. It just says in verse 8 that they were given authority to kill, but it doesn't say that they are killing. So notice what at these renditions here. So this is somewhere in the Middle Ages. There's some paintings here of those 4 horses, and I am in no way an art critic, but I can see that those are very interesting drawings. There's a lot of symbolism. The horses have small heads. But one thing I can tell you is they don't scare me. Do they scare you? Do they look like they are in a terrible war? Do you see victims? Okay, now let's go forward to the next one. This is what is it? I think this is Adolf Duren. These are actually prints of wood carvings. And look at this. This is like somewhere in I think the 1600s or something. And if you take a moment for your eyes to adjust, you can discern 4 horses. 1, 2, 3, and here's a skinny horse. These are the same 4 horses. Kind of hard to see because it's black and white. But look at it. It's a complete war zone. There are people laying here, they're being trampled on. There are heads everywhere. Here's a mythological beast biting off a head. And then I want to call your attention to these riders. Of course, this one represents death. Oof. And look at these first 2 riders. Look at these hats. These are what we call papal hats. They are the hats that popes would have. So this is during the time that the churches were kind of at war with each other. And so they put these riders who are bad people, and they gave them a hat of a pope so as to say, this is the Catholic Church murdering people. There's nothing peaceful about this, but it represents the exact same passage of text. So once you've seen this for a while, and then you go back and read the text, I think there's a bigger chance that you would feel that the text is aggressive than when you see this. So the role of art is very interesting. We tend to think that the text influences what art is being made, but I wonder, could it be the other way around? Whatever we are exposed to in art and media may influence how we read. Then in chapter 12, we see that verse that represents the main theme. And they overcame him, which is the person that's persecuting all these Christians, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, and they did not love their lives to death. This is a part where John, the seer, the one that sees all these revelations, comes up and is constantly looking around, and he sees a place and he sees all these people, and he says, who are they? And they say, oh, these are people that come out of the Great Depression. But they've overcome the enemy by the blood of the Lamb. That's real cryptic, right? But that's the sacrifice of Jesus. And by the word of the testimony, by the way that they live their life. as Jesus followers. And apparently they died. And then the story continues, and then it gives a story that really sounds like a myth they were familiar with. The myth of Apollo, the son of Zeus. Now, listen, this is in Asia. This is close to where you have all these myths around. And so it actually talks about a woman who's about to give birth to a son, and she has the sun on her head, and it reminds them of the Greco-Roman gods. But it almost sounds like a Christmas story. A little baby boy is born, and who will rule the earth with a rod of iron. That really sounds like Jesus. And then he's snatched up and he's taken up back up to the sky. It sounds like a Christmas story. There you have it, a woman clothed with the sun. It says she was pregnant and crying out in birth pangs. She gave birth to a son halfway through, a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Interesting, huh? When you get to Revelation 13, all sorts of beasts appear, otherworldly beings, and they have a ton of heads and crowns. And this is actually what we call Nero Redividus. Nero who came back to life. Now, this is in the 90s, but in the 50s and 60s, there was an emperor that everybody was so scared of, the Emperor Nero, remember? People were so scared. And they were afraid that he would come back to life. And it's kind of like how people think that Elvis never really died, and other conspiracy theories. JFK never died. And they believed that Nero never truly died. And they were always afraid he would come back. And this part of the text kind of lives of that. And they say, you know, maybe one day a bad person is coming, and it's going to be Nero. And in the apocalyptic kind of genre, it plays off that. So interesting how it talks about that. And then it says, you know, you shouldn't take the mark of the beast. Now, this really sounds really weird, but remember, all the other writings, First Enoch, the Assumption of Moses, they're all weird too, but the people liked it. And so as a way of encouraging these early Christians in those churches, it said, you know, don't give in to what the Roman Empire wants from you. Don't get the mark of the beast, because it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, so everybody, to get a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. I mean, this is what the Roman Empire wants you, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, and that is the name of the beast or the number of its name. And then it turns out to be 666. Sometimes in modern day society, people think that this is something that's futuristic. It's yet to come. When I lived in the 80s and 90s, that was that barcode. I still remember when that first came out. Up to that time, you just had a number, and at the cashier, they just type in the number. But no, I lived when the barcode came out, and people said, "Oh, that's a sign of the beast. You shouldn't go to the supermarkets that have it." If we had practiced that up to today, we wouldn't have eaten in decades. That's not what it's about. It's not just the mark of the beast that it talks about. Throughout the whole book of Revelation, it constantly talks about people getting names and signs. If you ever have a chance to read the book of Revelation from beginning to end, first of all, remember, it's supposed to be a blessed experience. Don't be scared. And then you see over and over that Jesus followers in these churches, they're constantly being quote unquote marked. They get the name of Jesus on their head or on their thigh, or the name of the Father. And so all it says is, don't get the mark of the empire. But everybody else, all the way at the end, the believers constantly have, if you will, the mark of the seal of Christ. They have nothing to fear. It says they will see his face and his name will be on their foreheads. The question really becomes, who are you following? Are you following culture, the Roman Empire, or are you following Jesus? And so that's the encouragement. You know, just know who you're following and just hang in there. And that's really exciting. There's all sorts of terrible things are happening, which is very typical for apocalyptic literature. You know, it throws stuff on the earth, and then all these people die, and then it throws stuff again, and the same people die again. And then they throw stuff again, and the same people die again. You're dead, and then you're deader, and then you're even deader. And this is just a different kind of literature. And then it's party time. The heaven opens. Here comes another otherworldly being. And it's a horse. And the person on it represents Jesus. He comes. And he has all these diadems, which is kind of like na boo boo to the emperor. The emperor, they gets like one crown. This one has many, many crowns. And then it describes the person. And the person is not coming. This is not Jesus coming back. This is simply Jesus appearing to comfort his people. It says he comes and he has a robe. He says he was clothed. He comes on a horse and he's clothed with a robe dipped in blood. These riders that come on horses, they often were like really higher ups, like high people in the army, or the emperor would come on a beautiful white horse, very costly, very ornate. But this person is wearing a robe, and it's dipped in blood at the bottom. And it says his name is the Word of God. And that's how Jesus is introduced in chapter 1. And then looking at the Greek here, remember we're studying Greek, that idea of a robe dipped in blood, it tells us a little bit about how that robe was dipped in blood. It's actually an action that was completed in the past with ongoing consequences in the future. So the question becomes, when in history would that robe of that person on the horse have been dipped in blood? And it's done. And if that person is Jesus, and this is symbolic, when would Jesus have had his robe dipped in blood and it's done? And it has consequences for the future. That's right. That would have been on the cross. And he has armies following him, like the emperor. But notice the armies do not have blood everywhere. They're wearing fine linen, white and pure, following him also on white horses. They didn't go into some war where the world is ending and everything becomes a big old final terrible scene. Not at all. And in fact, you can see who it is. It says on his thigh, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He beats the snot out of everyone. This is exciting. This book is not scary. This book is exciting. It's different because we're not used to the genre, right? But this is really exciting news. This leans on the idea that Jesus returns from a battle. He doesn't go into a battle. So as a Jesus follower myself, I never worry about the end of the world. I don't worry if I'm in the middle of wars about to burst out. I really don't believe this world is going to end in some massive battle. I don't believe in Jesus having to come back and having to find Satan or something. I don't believe in end time writings whatsoever. Absolutely not. I believe in good news. I believe when Jesus comes back, it's good news. I don't fear that day. I think it's going to be a great day. You know why? Because we already had a war. We already had a battle. And that was when Jesus died on the cross and rose. And that's what that robe represents. And the good news flowing from there is grace and love. Everybody is welcome to his grace. Everybody is welcome to his love. And that's the message, really, of the New Testament. And that's the message for everyone who studied this class. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are interested in the story. This is just where it starts. Pick up a New Testament, start reading it, look at it in the context of the whole story, and give it a shot. Give church a start. Okay, give it a shot. All right, so nice to meet you. Bye-bye.